A woman who was bludgeoned to within an inch of her life would think to fake her own death to make the man leave. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of David Gerard. Viewer discretion is advised. Before we get started into the video, I just want to make something very clear. I made a written post about this on my page, but I want to say it with my own face. I am a member of the LGBTQ+. I am gay. I'm the G. Some of you may notice I have a pride flag behind me, and it has the trans part of it, there as well, because they're a part of the community. Someone decided to leave an anti-trans comment saying I'm smart enough to understand that lifestyle, that it's not right. So if you are in any way, shape, or form against the LGBTQ+, you don't have a place here on this channel. You just don't. You can walk your cis straight ass directly out of here, and I'll be happy to never see you again. This is a safe place. I like to make it that way. So you don't just think about what I'm going to see in the comments. You have to think about what other people are going to see as well. Do you know how many people out there are on the brink of ending their own life because of their lifestyle, because of who they were born with? And sometimes a comment like that might be the last thing to push them over the edge. So maybe next time, keep your mouth shut and don't say anything at all. You don't even have to say comments like, well, I don't always support the LGBTQ+, but ... don't care what the rest of the statement's going to be. All right? You don't need to say that. You just don't say it. Don't say it. I don't care. I don't care to hear you say or see you say, I don't always support blah, blah, blah. Just keep it to yourself. All right? Or make yourself known in the comments, and when and if I see that comment, I'll just block you for you. That's fine. I have no problems with that. But I am a member of that community, all right? I was born this way, baby, as Lady Gaga said. So if you have ignorant thoughts about it, just go away. I will be happy to lose whatever amount of subscribers I lose if they are bigoted, hateful, or racist people. Anyway, let's get into the story. So, this takes place in 1999, and this is in Grays Harbor, which is in Washington State. Grays Harbor, as I understand, is a little outside of Seattle. This is like a part of Washington that has a lot of farming areas, a lot of just open land, very desolate kind of rural parts of the state, and appears to be a really good place to sit down and raise a family, And that's exactly what 32-year-old Frankie Cochran wanted to do with her life eventually, raise a family and grow up in a peaceful community. Frankie worked at a local diner called the Little Red Barn. She'd been there for years. She was described as someone who is incredibly personable, very friendly, very outgoing. She is not remotely shy. She just has a very warm and very welcoming demeanor, and everyone loved her. By 1999, she wasn't necessarily looking for love, but apparently one day had walked into the diner anyway. She met a charming man by the name of David Gerard. She became instantly smitten with him, and he her, and they soon started dating. Everything was going wonderful. A couple of months goes by. They're still doing great. Frankie thinks that she has found the one. Sometime later, they end up moving in together, and things are moving at a good pace, and, who knows what the future may bring. Now, Frankie keeps working at the diner because David has issues holding down a job. He has problems staying employed. He has a very big personality, and not in the super positive way. His, running of his mouth will sometimes get him fired, and he kind of goes from job to job to job. He was, personality-wise, he was basically the polar opposite of Frankie. He was rough around the edges, if you will. And it was quickly becoming apparent that he may not be the provider that he wanted to be. And then Frankie picked up on his jealous streak. Anytime that he observed at the diner her talking to a male customer and just in her normal friendly manner, he immediately thought that the guy was hitting on her, flirting with her, and he got really angry, and it just really made his blood boil every time he saw it. It got to a point where she was just simply not allowed to talk to any man whatsoever, even customers. He became extremely controlling. He basically tried to dictate what Frankie could do and could not do in her day-to-day life. Then it got to a point where she wasn't even allowed to talk to anyone, including like females or family members, because if he heard her talking on the phone to someone, he thought, oh, she's talking to a guy, she's flirting with him, hang up the phone. And then he would get really angry and start just like yelling at her and like throwing things around the house. She became David's hostage, so to speak. One day, Frankie came across an item when she was doing laundry, and it fell out of David's wallet, which was still in his pants. And it was like a folded up, kind of worn out newspaper clipping. And it was the story of a woman named Patty Rodriguez, who back in 1995, this is about 4 years prior to the story I'm telling now, Patty Rodriguez died in a house fire alongside her 2 boys and her mother. It was ruled an accidental fire. It started in the wood stove, apparently in the living room, which is where Patty's mom, Patricia, where she slept. Patricia Rodriguez was 66 years old. Patty was 34. And then her 2 boys that also died in the fire were 8-year-old Matthew and 6-year-old Joshua. This also happened in Grays Harbor, Washington, and a gentleman was driving past the house around 4:45 in the morning. He noticed the fire. He got out of his car, started screaming to neighbors. He even shot his gun in the air to alert people. This is back before cell phones, obviously, just to make sure people were calling 911, but unfortunately it was already far too late because all 4 family members were dead. Everyone was believed to be asleep at the time, and like I said, they did not determine that it was, arson or done intentionally. It was just an accident. So by the time Frankie finds the folded up piece of newspaper in his wallet, she's like, well, why do you have this? Why are you saving this particular story? Why on earth would he have it? Was he connected to it in some way? Well, it turns out, yes. Patty Rodriguez was his former girlfriend. As a matter of fact, Patty was dating David in 1995. He allegedly was seen at the house after the fire had been put out, but not before or during. So he would claim to Frankie that the newspaper clipping in his wallet was just his way of remembering his girlfriend who passed away. Soon after this little moment where she found the newspaper clipping, David basically forced Frankie to quit her job at the diner. He just couldn't handle her being there and, dealing with all the male customers that come in. Which is kind of weird because David at this point still can't hold down a job. He doesn't really have stable employment, so if he's not making money and she's not making money, how are the bills getting paid? So Frankie kind of went behind his back a little bit, and she went to apply at a local grocery store. And when she was able to get an interview, that's when she told David about it. And David lost his mind. He runs around the house screaming, cussing at her, and he's throwing things around the house. He's breaking anything and everything he can get his hands on. He's throwing full shelving units over, breaking everything on the shelves. There's just glass being shattered all over the ground. He then takes a bottle of bleach, opens it, and begins to just dump it all over Frankie's clothing items, just ruining all of her clothes. And then he just storms out of the house. Sounds like David needs a cookie and possibly a nap. So she calls the police to report this, but then she ends up being a little too scared to actually file any charges against him, which, again, in domestic cases like this is pretty common. But she did manage to get out of the house while he was gone, and she went to her parents' house to stay with them for a little bit. Animal lovers, you may want to cover your ears at this part because it's, yeah. One day, when Frankie was staying with her parents, her mom went out to the car to go to work or wherever she was going to that morning. And in the car was her cat. The cat had been brutally murdered and staged like in the car so that the mom would find it. They felt that it was pretty obviously David who did that. They didn't have proof of it. But that's kind of, they felt like it was a message being sent. But Frankie, believing the best in everyone, she just couldn't really believe that this is something David would do. So she didn't believe he did that. And she kind of felt like, David's not this monster of a person. So eventually, she actually ends up going back with him and moves back into the house together. David managed to secure a job at a local dairy farm, and he also got a job for Frankie there. She would be like a milker, so she would milk cows and whatnot. So they were working together. But David went straight back to his old jealous ways when he saw Frankie talking to one of their bosses, an older gentleman. He immediately became jealous and assumed that he was hitting on her and she was flirting with him, even though that definitely was not the case. He believed it anyway, and then he lost his mind on her again. I mean, he straight up accused Frankie of having an affair with their boss. And so one morning when they were pulling into work, and he basically said that to her, that you're having an affair with him. She's like, no, I'm not. Are you crazy? And she goes, you know what? We have to end this. I'm done. I'm breaking up with you. And so what he does is he gets out of the car, goes to the other side, rips open the passenger side door, grabs Frankie by her hair, and yanks her full force out of the car, and kind of begins to attack her. Frankie still is holding like a hot cup of coffee in her hand, so what she does is she takes it and she smashes it against his face. So not only hitting him with the cup, but also burning like his face and his chest with the super hot coffee. And then he runs into the nearby barn. He takes a hammer and he walks back out and, basically lifts it up to her. And then for some reason, he just sort of stops. He just drops the hammer, gets in the car on his own, and then just speeds away. But he threatened to kill her. He had like total crazy eyes going, and he really looked like he was about to hit her over the head with a hammer. So she would go to police to report this. But lo and behold, David also went to police to report Frankie for domestic assault, claiming that she hit him and burned him with coffee, which she did. But what he didn't say was that it was in self-defense from him yanking her hair, which later they would find that she actually suffered some injuries from that. And so they basically determined that David was in the wrong, and so he was arrested and put in jail. Frankie finally has her way out, so she kind of gets all the things she can from their house, and then she moves in with some other relatives. 2 days after the incident, David is basically released from jail, and he is put on a no-contact order against Frankie, so he's not allowed to be anywhere near her or contact her in any way. But ultimately, that's just a piece of paper, and when someone is determined, they're determined. On the night of March 17th, 1999, Frankie is asked by her boss to work that night shift because the coworker who was supposed to had called out sick. And by the way, David was fired immediately after the incident that took place a couple days prior. So that night, Frankie is basically at work, essentially alone, and she is in the barn with the cows when she's just sort of minding her own business, and out of absolutely nowhere, she has no time to react. She has a hammer struck against her head. She turns, it's David. He just hit her over the head with a hammer. And then as she collapses to the ground, he takes the hammer and he bashes her on the head at least 3 more times. Then he takes out a pocket knife and he cuts it into her throat, takes it out. He then begins to start choking her, and then when that's not doing anything, I guess, he takes the claw end of the hammer and then he smashes it into her neck a couple of times. At this point, she is bloodied. She is, in immense pain, but she is not dead. So what she does, because she can see the look in his eyes, like, this is a crazy person. He's not saying a word, by the way. He doesn't say a single thing to her. And so what she does is she begins to fake like her breath is slowly going away. So she takes she separates her breathing, and then eventually she takes one big breath and holds it so that it does not appear that she is breathing. She holds it for as long as humanly possible in order to fake being dead so that David would believe she was dead and that he would leave. And unbelievably, it worked. He believed that she was dead, and he took off. Later that evening, around 10 p.m., Frankie's boss arrives back to work to kind of take over the rest of the shift, and he finds the badly beaten and bloodied, what he thought was body of Frankie. So he immediately calls 911. She is rushed to the hospital, and she recovers. She actually survives the attack. While on the way to the hospital, she does manage to get everything she can in her to basically utter one sentence, and that was, David Gerard did this. So she named exactly who it was who did that. So police begin immediately searching for David, and then a grocery store clerk later that, in the early morning, I guess, calls to say they saw David walk into their store, and police arrive kind of quietly. They find David in the store and they arrest him, apparently without incident. So, like I said, Frankie survives the ordeal, which is unbelievable given how much trauma she took, it's incredible. David is then charged with first-degree attempted murder, and he is convicted of that, and he is sentenced to 37 years in prison. Now, because he was convicted, David had to surrender a sample of his DNA. That's just the law. So that in case he reoffends after the fact, after he's released in 37 years, they have his DNA on file. Well, it turns out this was not David's first time at the rodeo. Remember that folded up piece of paper, the newspaper clipping about the fire that happened in the same city? Well, police began to reinvestigate that when they found out who Patty Rodriguez's ex-boyfriend was, and that was David. So they interviewed a bunch of people, and they found out that the night of the fire, Patty broke up with David publicly at a bar. They had a huge argument, and they both kind of stormed out together. And then, not but 5-6 hours later, in the early morning hours, they find Patty's house engulfed in flames, with all 4 occupants deceased, and David conveniently showing up after the fire is put out. Unfortunately, there was no evidence collected at the fire that they could prove that the fire was set intentionally, and they had nothing physical to connect David to setting the fire and killing those 4 people. But it is widely believed that he likely did it, just given his how quick he is to rage, but he's never been charged with it. He's just considered a person of interest. However, his DNA that he had to provide did link to 2 other murders that occurred earlier in the 90s. On February 6, 1991, 34-year-old Elaine McCollum was found brutally murdered on the side of the road. And this was in Aberdeen, Washington, which is basically in the same area as the Frankie story took place. She had tire treads all over her body, and her face, they described that it was so badly peeled from the asphalt that basically all you could see was her skull, the skeleton portion, and that the skin and the muscle and all that was gone. They determined that she was run over multiple times and that she was also dragged along the asphalt. So this was intentional. The person this wasn't like a hit and run. This was, they could prove that she was run over, backed over, run over, backed over, and dragged. So someone did that to her on purpose. Obviously, police could say that this was a crime of absolute rage. It was extremely violent. And they collected some evidence. There wasn't a ton. They did find DNA on her clothing that was not hers. But this is also 1991, so this is kind of like in the infancy of all the DNA testing they could do now. So it didn't actually match anyone. And in terms of, was there any like link to David directly? Not that I could find. In terms of like, did they have a relationship? Did they know each other? She was last seen, I guess, at a bar or near a bar in Aberdeen the night before she was found. But I don't know if anyone's ever said, like, yeah, he was also there and I saw him with her kind of thing. There's really none of that. 5 years later, on August 4th, 1996, on the same stretch of road where Elaine was found 5 years prior, but about a mile or so away, another body was found. It was the body of 41-year-old Carol Layton. She had been stabbed many, many, many times. The coroner would determine that the force that was used for these particular stab wounds was done with incredible force. So this was like clearly a crime of rage, of passion, of violence, of just pure anger, which would sort of bounce back to the murder of Elaine because it was done in a different method, but it looked very aggressive and very violent. And then if you fast forward to 1999, the hammer attack on Frankie, very similar, very violent, very rage-filled. In this instance, they found male bodily fluid, semen, inside of Carol. And again, at the time, it did not match anyone. She, too, was also last seen kind of in the Aberdeen area near a bar. But again, no one could place David specifically with her. And I also don't know of any actual connection between the two of them, like if they were dating. But her case would go cold. The case of Elaine also went cold. And that was until 1999 when David Gerard was required to give his DNA. And when they plugged it into the system, boom, it was a match to both. So the DNA found on Elaine's clothing and the DNA found inside Carol were both matched conclusively to David Gerard. Now, unfortunately, in the case of Elaine, that DNA on her clothing did not necessarily mean he had anything to do with her murder. They would need a lot more physical evidence to prove that. Unfortunately, they have none. They have absolutely nothing. They don't really have any witness statements. So unfortunately, her murder to this day has gone unsolved. That being said, the DNA that was found inside Carol, that was more conclusive evidence that he was involved with her murder because they could suggest that this was like a sexual assault that led to him then killing the woman. So he was charged with her murder and he pled not guilty. The evidence wasn't super strong, but they had enough to possibly convince a jury that he was guilty. So what he ended up doing was he signed an Alford plea, which is basically the suspect, admitting that the jury has enough evidence to convict them, but they are maintaining their own innocence. So they're not pleading guilty, technically. They're saying they're innocent, but they're pleading guilty, I guess, is what it would be. It's very similar to what Michael Peterson did with the staircase case. He did that as well. And then the West Memphis 3 ended up taking an Alford plea as well. So he was handed an additional 17 years for that murder on top of the 37 years he got for the attempted murder, which is kind of weird, right? Attempted murder, you think those would be reversed. Charges to this day have never been filed against anyone for the fire-related deaths of Patty Rodriguez and her family. Charges have never been filed in terms of the murder of Elaine McCollum. Now, he has been suspected in other murders, possibly. 19-year-old Karen Connor was found murdered in 1982. And this was in, I believe, the Aberdeen, Washington area, and she was found on the side of the road. 18-year-old Roberta Strasbaugh was also found on the side of the road, murdered, and that was in Lewis County, Washington, and that was in the late 80s. On October 12, 1988, 17-year-old Tracy West would vanish. They would find her motorbike sort of tossed over on the side of the road, but no sign of her, no signs of foul play. It wouldn't be until 6 years later, on October 17th, 1994, where they found a human skull that they were able to determine was the skull of Tracy West. And they also found some of her belongings near the skull. Now, the Green River Killer was suspected in a few of these, but from what I understand, he was eventually ruled out or cleared of these particular ones. And it also needs to be noted that David Gerard has not been labeled an official suspect in any of these cases I just mentioned. It's more just speculation. It happened in the same area. They're all found on the side of the road. All pretty girls. They're all murdered in brutal ways. So, could there be a connection? Possibly. He's never admitted to any of them at all. He is technically killed, if you really think about it, if he is responsible for the fire deaths and that of Elaine McCollum, her murder, then he's possibly killed 6 people and attempted to murder 1 more. So it's not that far-fetched to believe that he may have killed these other people, as well as God knows how many more. He's obviously a very unstable, very mentally unbalanced person who needs help. And I sincerely hope that he doesn't harm anyone ever again. But there is a very good chance that at this point he will be released, before the end of his life. So I just hope no one else goes into his path, because we all know what happens. By the way, the little bit I found about his past, apparently his dad really wasn't in the picture, and his mom was really abusive. She would, allegedly, according to him, she would hit him across the face with a skillet, frying pan or whatever. And apparently this happened all the time, according to David. And of course, it's certainly possible that kind of abuse would trigger the eventual rage he had developed and subsequently turned against many other people. But it's not an excuse. He's still within his own mindset to know right from wrong, and so he still committed murder and attempted murder. He is still a monster, right? He is still a monster. So... But that is actually it for this case. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, you can find a lot more videos here on YouTube, depending on where I put the little box thing. Here's another case you can watch, or wherever the hell it is. You can go to my TikTok page, but I don't think it's going to be there much longer because it's on a very thin line here. I'm trying to get as many videos over here from there in compilation form, so maybe I'll get that done before they give my old page the boot. If you have a case you would like me to cover, please send me an email to mikey@truecrimerer.com. The email is listed below. Please go to my link tree below and you can find the Crimerer case list of all the names I already have on there. If you find the name you want me to cover on there, no need to send me anything. It's already there. I pick my cases at random. I'll get to it when I get to it eventually. If you don't see the name on there, then just send me a quick email with the name, where it happened, when it happened, and then I can add it to my list. Next, if you want to support me in any way, we do sell merch. We sell t-shirts like the Making a True Crimerer shirts like this, or we have other little sayings. We sell a wine glass. You can kind of see it back there, right there. It's blurry, but whatever. And other things we sell there. We do ship internationally. Adam makes my merch. He does it all himself. He ships it all himself. He will ship to you wherever in the world you are. Just be aware there's going to be, a larger shipping fee for international. Lastly, if you have Discord and you want to join my Discord server, it's also linked in the link tree below with everything else. So feel free to join it. Please be over the age of 18. If you're not, we'll kick you out. Also, give my Twitter and Facebook a follow. Those are also linked in the link tree. I'm trying to branch out across multiple platforms just to kind of spread the love, spread the awareness, I guess, if you will. But that is it, True Crime Aroonies. That is it for this case. Until the next case, then... That was the entire case. I just said backwards. You're welcome. In case anyone wants to play it back. But don't do that. This is not a good way to end a video. Let me think of something else better. So, oh, I got it.